Welcome to Chapter 5, Sophisticated Cyber Criminal Organizations. We're going to go through and talk a little bit about the organizations that are out there that are threats to us. These are not going to be hackers and other criminals, but this is going to be legitimate organizations that are basically purposed to commit crime. And we're going to talk a little bit about those types of organizations. Some of them are actually sponsored by nation states. So by the end of this, you should be able to describe the evolution of cybercrime from rogue individuals to sophisticated criminal organizations, define and describe the various types of espionage, define and describe the various types of insider fraud, identify and discuss various types of sophisticated criminal organizations or enterprises engaged, and discuss the underground marketplace referred to as the deep web or the Tornet. And that's going to be something you should be familiar with, as that is one of the research. So as we have grown, we've thrown things out onto the web. Young companies that want to get onto the web today, if they don't have a website, don't have a Twitter, don't have a Facebook, they don't stand a chance in the economy, because that's where people go to look at you before they buy. People are going to go to Yelp and look and see what your ratings are. They're going to look at your Facebook and your other advertising faces to see whether or not you're somebody of interest or somebody that they want to do business with. Getting 2 stars on a rating is death in the merchant world. So companies spend a lot of time trying to make sure that they're not. But if I could attack that somehow, and if I could go in and take away your products and goods by doing malicious stars, or I could do other things, you can see very quickly how I could take over your basic infrastructure. So think of all the things that we put online: banking, ATMs, sharing files, email, pictures, videos, our deepest and darkest secrets in blogs and social media. We take pictures and we post. YouTube, where we post the latest goofy thing that happened to us, our videos. Snapchats that we all rely on being deleted, that sometimes aren't deleted. Excuse me. So all these things we have to take into consideration. Again, anytime there's a new technology, anytime there's a growth or a disruptor in the technology world, you're the one they're going to look to guard against the threats that come from that new technology. So when we talk, and there's a lot of talk going on right now, with the economies and intellectual property theft, and how China is stealing things from us and all that kind of stuff, that we have to basically make sure that we are keeping our technology guardianship up. All right. So espionage, for example, it's a traditional crime. It's something that's been around forever. Espionage was first reported in the 1700s when European companies obtained information on how to manufacture porcelain from China. Espionage continues today as China was able to steal most of the plans of the stealth fighter, most of the plans of our B-2 bomber. They have been able to gather all this information. It's not because they get on kind of the web and they grab it, but they're able to get into the file systems of Boeing and McDonnell Douglas and some of these large mainstream manufacturers that keep very sensitive documents, sometimes in an unprotected form. This is also where a weak link, the insider, comes in, because the insider is also somebody that's going to give away that information. The insider is that kind of that golden ticket into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. So if I want to steal something I'm going to look for someone that I can manipulate, someone that may be financially destitute, someone who is mad at the company, things such as that. So again, we talked about this a little bit before, especially in chapter 3. As a manager of IT, which hopefully you guys are going to move into, it's going to be your responsibility. It's going to be your purpose to look at people in your organization, not just the threats from technology. You're also going to have to look at the people in that organization and see if they are causing the problems. Um, espionage has moved into the state-sponsored venue. It is something that really came from state-sponsored. Go back to the World War I and World War II. Well before that, we've always sought the tactical advantage in combat. So, being able to identify where our enemy or our foe is really important in a tactical or having a tactical advantage. Espionage is basically, like I was saying, removing documents and removing things from defense corporations, inventions, patents, artistic works, and designs are all a part of that intellectual property. If I can steal that stuff, I don't have to pay for it. So when people talk about the fraud of computer software, if I don't have to pay for Microsoft Office or Microsoft Windows because I've pirated it or I've stolen the code and I'm replicating that intellectual property in my own country, well, one, I'm not going to prosecute anybody because they're using a stolen copy because it's my copy. The copyright protection doesn't really hold any water if the country that stole the software doesn't recognize copyright or international copyright. They're certainly not going to recognize American copyright or the federal law because our federal law doesn't exist in another country. They have their own laws and they have their own agreements. We do have agreements between us where we have mutual interests and mutual laws, but they don't always meet one for one. So we do have holes, so to speak, in that world. All right. So seeking out those patents, inventions, literary arts, artistic works, designs, those are all things that people are looking for. And the Chinese and Russians, who are the main espionage gatherers on us right now, there's some other smaller countries that are also doing it, but not as well. So we have to really worry about keeping our servers secure. We have to make sure that we have a very resilient and robust protection mechanism around it to protect that intellectual property. The Office of National Counterintelligence defined industrial espionage, economic espionage, and corporate espionage is three of the categories or objectives of nation states. Okay, so industrial espionage is stealing the plans and things of an industry, such as the defense industry, which is attacked routinely. People sell intellectual property out of the industrial industries to other countries pretty routinely, and that comes back to your insider threat. Economic. How do I destroy your country by not having to pay for the intellectual property that you're producing? We're becoming an information-based country. So if we're an information-based country and we produce information as our main export, well, if you take information away and don't pay for it and just replicate it somewhere else, then that hurts our economy because we're no longer making money on that that good or export that we're relying on, that thing that we create, which is information. And then corporate espionage. Corporate espionage is two companies that are seeking information between one another. So I have the the ability to have Xerox go after Ricoh, for example, and they're trying to get the latest plans that Ricoh is coming out for their copier or scanner. If they can steal that information and produce it first and get to the market first, well, then they're going to make the money, and then Xerox is going to come in, or Ricoh is going to come in behind them and maybe not be the market leader. So there's a lot of corporate espionage that goes on. People take pictures in boardrooms. People take pictures of walking into a business just to grab pricing. Things such as that. It's all competitive, and they call it competitive research sometimes. Well, competitive research, there's certain types of competitive research, but when you start actually digging into private information behind secure systems to gather somebody's intellectual property, well, now you're doing corporate espionage. Now you're actually stepping over that line. There is a line between corporate espionage and criminal activity. The FBI estimates that U.S. companies lose billions of dollars every year. Again, look at North Korea. North Korea does billions of dollars worth of information or intellectual property theft every year. Their computer crime is what funds their country to a great extent. They're held to account in the legal world for many things, and they can't export and import. But one of the things that we can't really regulate is technology. If you look around universities, especially in Europe, there was a heavy increase of North Koreans that were sent to technology degree programs. There was a large population that actually came to the United States. There was the FBI put up a red flag a few years ago and said, hey, we have this large increase of North Koreans in our country. So the types of IP targeted for theft, according to the ACES report, customer-related 26, basic research 20, business strategy and planning 16, and manufacturing process 5. Why is manufacturing process so low? Because we're not manufacturing like we used to. We are not the innovators of the manufacturing process. What we are innovators of is people's information. Our credit card companies, insurance companies, all these other companies that hold personally protected information in their servers. That's that piece of gold that someone doing espionage is looking for. Basic research and R&D. If they can get in, they can steal the plans of our latest equipment being built or developed or tooled. They want that stuff. So again, if this was 40 years ago, 50 years ago, I have to go back even further now, probably 60 years ago, manufacturing actually would have been a much higher category, because people were actually looking at our ability to create products and goods. And now we've changed over to a more information-based society, so therefore customer-related information is a lot more desirable to that cyber thief. Espionage is a service. People get paid to do espionage. There are companies that sell that service. If you would like to do crimeware, if you would like to do espionage, you pay a fee, and organizations will go out and collect information for you, and they will charge your organization or your nation state to do that. So if I have a company, or if I create a company and I bring in the best talent possible for doing some type of hack, for example, or some type of information gathering, well, then I can sell that service out to other people. Now, if my nation state supports me, so if I'm in a country that is light on computer regulations and likes the fact that I'm selling and doing stuff for my company and we're bringing in money to the country, they may look the other way. In the United States, it's going to be very difficult. But once you leave the United States, there are many other countries out there that will look the other way if people are making money. Insider fraud. We talked about insider fraud. We've covered insider fraud several different times, and the reason it's covered so many times is it's so important. Insider fraud costs U.S. businesses $40 billion a year. U.S. Department of Commerce estimates 95% of business failures are because of insider fraud. Somebody giving away the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, and once their intellectual property is taken, they don't have anything left to sell. You got to remember as an IT manager, you're going to protect the outside. You're going to protect your wall, your firewall. You've got to monitor the inside, and you also have to talk to your supervisors and your managers, and they have to be cognizant of people that are going through strife or struggles. People that are strapped for money make bad decisions. People that are threatened make bad decisions. People that are caught in compromising activities make bad decisions when it comes to opening up or allowing people onto your network. Training helps with this, but the biggest thing is see something, or if you see something, say something. You hear that on the news, you hear it all, but it's absolutely true. If your corporate culture is not a see something, say something culture, you're going to be a victim of some type of insider fraud at some point. So kind of going back to the reasons why people do things, it's basically the easiest of two, or making a choice between two very hard decisions. So if I put you into a compromising position and then I threaten you to go get some data from the company, or I'll expose you for some activity that you've done or some activity that I put you into without your knowledge, you may make the decision of saying, I'm just going to go ahead and give them their information, and I'm not going to worry about it. Lots of people get caught up in that. Lots of people get caught up in giving that one little piece of information, and once they give that one little piece of information, that's it. You're compromised. Once you're compromised, you can't go back, because the next one's going to be a little bit more damaging. The next one's going to be, the next ask is going to say, you've already done this. We can report you for what you've done already. We need more information. So once they're in that trap, they'll be in that trap until you give them a way out. You as IT managers need to make sure your policies and your company documents give that employee a way out. You need to have some type of group or some type of board or something that someone can go to and say, hey, I'm trapped. How do I get out of this situation? The CERT basically tracked 4 milestones in a fraud case. First one, getting hired at the target company. Beginning criminal activity. Company detects the fraud. Company reports the fraud to law enforcement. And this is a person that's coming into your company with the purpose of committing a crime. So what I do is I'm doing corporate espionage, working for someone else. You hire me, I come in, I now have implied trust given to me. I'm on your network. I can now see files. I can see things that I'm not supposed to see. And I begin my criminal activity of gathering information. The company will then detect it and then report to law enforcement. And that would be a wonderful thing if that's actually what happened. But what actually happens is they begin their criminal activity. The company may detect it, may not detect it. It gets reported. They find out about it. And then the company makes a decision, a corporate decision, of whether or not to report to law enforcement. Because sometimes they'll report to law enforcement and sometimes they will not report to law enforcement. It all depends on the company's ability to manage the message. If they do not want that public scrutiny, that spotlight put on their company for this, they may look at the amount that was taken and say, it's really not that damaging. We can survive this, and they move Sabotage is a category of insider threat that basically describes when an individual takes revenge against the organization. Insider sabotage happens quite often. We talked about in one of the earlier chapters about the Olympic Games and the Stuxnet virus that was released. That was sabotage. That sabotaged the centrifuges in Iran, and it destroyed the centrifuges in Iran at their the Natanz nuclear plant. That's sabotage. Sabotage on a corporate side may be someone that is mad and takes it out on the organization and causes some destructive activity on your network, destroys files, puts in a malicious virus, installs some type of hole for somebody and does it intentionally to get back at the organization. Again, this is something that needs to be looked for. This is something that needs to be constantly watched for because it does happen. It does happen rather routinely. Again, once IT understands the sabotage, it may or may not get reported. So don't fall in love with your case. A lot of people go into management and they're just, hey, I've got it. Here's the person. This is what they did. And management makes a decision to say, you know what, let the person go and we'll just call it a day. And, IT people get very upset sometimes because they don't get that satisfaction of the conviction, the legal ramifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest problem in that arena is once the company does that, they set a track record. And that now becomes the new normal for that organization. And the next person that comes along is probably going to think, I could do a little sabotage, or I could do some fraud, I could do some stuff. It's really not going to hurt me so much because the last couple people that got caught doing that, they got fired and their exit bonus was what they stole, which has happened in many cases that I've actually seen. So as an IT person, understand you're going to have insider fraud. You're probably going to have insider sabotage. Don't fall in love with your case. It's the company's decision. It's their money, their network. You just have to do the right thing and be the guardian at the door and warn everybody of the trouble. All right, so we've talked a little bit about sophisticated criminal organizations and their global reach. The Russian Business Network is a very famous organization that is a crimeware organization. They sell crimeware. In other words, you can go to them and buy criminal software to do certain things, produce identities, ID cards, hack, do criminal or cyber criminal activity. These are all things that you can do. The United Nations did that comprehensive study on cybercrime, and they said 60% of all internet users are in developing countries. This can be a problem because they don't have that situational awareness. The other problem is that means there's 40% that are in developed countries, and if you're a cyber criminal, that's 40% of the people that you're probably going to go after. And then they found out that 45% are below the age of 25. Okay, so that means you have a huge population of people that may not know how to use the computer because they're not digital natives, they're digital immigrants. And two, you have a larger population of people, or you have a large population of people in developed world that are victims or could be victims. There's a lot of collaboration that goes on between the countries and criminal organizations. We've talked about how Russia has an espionage, but it also has criminal activity. It also has troll farms. It has all these different cyber activities. Russia has used the asymmetric and symmetric warfare model very well in Crimea. The very first place that they went to was the southernmost node of the Ukrainian network, took over that node and maintained that node. The reason they wanted that node is because once they owned that node, that access point into the overall Ukrainian network, they own the Ukrainian network. And Crimea and Ukraine shared networks and worked together on their internet access. So once they got the Crimean node, they owned everything that was going on the Ukrainian network, and that's how they controlled. They published viruses. They tried to activate some viruses. They were able to take power stations down, all from that node. They've also used the cyber attacks in preface to an attack in Georgia, the country of Georgia, when they went in and were helping the government in Georgia at the Georgia government's request, supposedly. Prior to that was a heavy bombardment of social media and email and hacking attacks and financial organizations going down, activities going down, etc. So they were they planned it out very well, and they were able to use the computers in coordination with a physical attack, which is, it's an alarming trend, but it's something that it's the new way that the world is working in the cyber realm. How do you measure the impact of organized crimes? Some have reports as high as trillions, some 12.5 billion. 80% of the cybercrime worldwide is perpetrated by organized crime. Absolutely believe that. I spent a lot of time with Interpol, and I will tell you, talking to them, they all talk about the organizations that are involved, the named organizations within military organizations of different countries that are out doing cybercrime. But again, getting an estimate or a real number, especially when corporations are involved, is difficult. Again, because they don't report. And that's something that hopefully through legal or through legislation may change. But again, that would only change the American reporting. It won't change the worldwide reporting. And more than likely, you won't see or regulation that is very effective. So the numbers of actual theft is going to always be off. Social networking sites they conduct intelligence operations. We've talked about this a little bit. We talked about how ISIS used the online media in preface to their attack on Mosul. People troll other people's social media. People listen, watch, and learn all about people from social media sites. I put a link to a video. It's called the Guru, and it's a little experiment that was done in Brussels, and it shows a individual that is telling the kind of the future and about people, and they learn that this guru has a microphone in his ear, and everything he's talking about is on their social media. So social media is used to circumvent and communicate through organizations and nation states, code words, lyrics, etc. I'm sure you've heard of the Mexican songs that are sung to communicate messages from cartel members to other cartel members. So there's many different ways, and this is not something new, but it's moved onto the internet. So now you can get on the internet and you can actually see these things happening on the internet. So I actually did some quite a bit of research on the African criminal enterprises recently in the last year or so, and what I find in my research of the African criminal enterprises, along with what the book's saying here, which is absolutely correct, but there's also an added thing that is the African criminal enterprise is a religious organization as well. They use their belief system to justify things that they do. So when you're watching interviews and you're listening to how and why people committed the crime, they will always say that they're doing this because they're reclaiming what was stolen from them in the past. They're using slavery and other things as their base for the commission of crimes. There's a very good video on YouTube. It's called the Yahoo Boys, and they go through and they talk about their conviction to take down all white rich people in the world, and take the money away from them, and take the money back that was stolen from them back in the 1800s during the slave trades. So there's an ideological element that goes to the African criminal enterprises. There's a whole nother side beyond just financial reward. That financial reward is coupled with a religious ideology that tells them that they can do what they want to do. There are several videos out there that show the witch doctor praying over a set of emails that are about to be sent out. The computer's there, and the witch doctor is praying over this computer for the success of these emails as they are being sent out. So it's, again, religious and ideological, which gives a whole nother reason why someone does that type of criminal activity, and why they are so dedicated to doing that type of criminal activity. Look at the Nigerian fraud scheme. It's been going on for years. I got a letter in the mail back in 1986 telling me that my long lost ancestor had left me $100 million, and all I had to do was send $500 to this address through the mail, and I would receive my check, and I was paying the customs fees for the check. It was just sitting there waiting for me. So that just moved onto the internet, so they could send out emails for free. But in the past, they would have mailbags, and they would pray over the mailbags. Now they pray over the computers before they send the emails out. So again, Nigerian fraud schemes, they're not going to go away. There's too much money in it, and it is an ideological event. As far as growth goes, there's a lot of attention now, especially with the African Union. They're trying to legitimize a lot of the business structures within the African continent. So the African Union is actually spending a lot of time and a lot of money to get the computer, or get a handle on the computers, and get a handle on the computer use by these criminal organizations. They don't want to be known as the scammers of the technology. They want to have a legitimate view or be viewed legitimately in the world. So as far as growth goes, I think with the advent of the African Union, you're going to see a little bit of growth de-escalation, only because the politics are going to kick in, and there's actually a greater good for African Union to be successful than to have these people that are scamming and doing things like that. There's much more economic reward if the African Union is successful in the global economy. So I think you're going to see a real pushback for that. A operation called Avalanche was conducted and was responsible for launching and managing massive global malware attacks and money mule recruiting campaigns. And they were able to dismantle a lot of the organizations, and the ones they didn't dismantle, they were able to map out organizational charts, clear lines of communication. Some really good methodologies were brought from that operation, and the FBI and the DOJ working together. There are basically two categories. of Asian criminal enterprises that were found, traditional criminal enterprises, and then non-traditional criminal enterprises. The criminal enterprises include the largest of the large mob style organizations called the Yakuza. Everybody's familiar with that. I'm sure you've heard it on TV. But they are a real thing. They do exist, and they do um, participate in criminal enterprise online because it is a very financially rich area. Every other named main group, from Antifa to the Aryan Nation to the Greenpeace to PETA, which are, I'm not saying they're criminal organizations or bad organizations, but they're organizations that spend a lot of time recruiting and gathering money. And their name and their organization has been misused many different times to gather money from members. Uh, I think the last one I saw was a Greenpeace one where they were looking for money for saving the whales. The Chinese had just passed the law saying they could whale again. They needed basically attack ships. They wanted to buy attack ships to go into the Arctic, and they made a ton of money on people sending in. Problem was it wasn't Greenpeace. It was an aliased organization like Greenpeace, but it wasn't Greenpeace. So all these other organizations, all of these, cause organizations, they get muddled in the internet, and sometimes that muddling ends up with people getting frauded. And that's one of the hard things about, this larger grouping of organizations. Um, Organizations originate in the Balkans. They were actually the ones that started the trolls. They were actually the original troll factories. The Macedonians were really good at coding, and they took what they knew in coding, and they were able to change that into criminal fraud, into fraud, cyber fraud. The Macedonians were really good at manipulating people. They were very good at gathering money. You see a lot of these criminal organizations growing, and they're growing quickly because they are looking for money streams. They're looking for their economy. Some of them are doing very well, some of them are not. So when people are in an economy they're not doing so well, they look for other mechanisms to make money, and that's where a lot of these organizations come from. A lot of the other organizations come from this kind of central leadership. They grew up under the Soviet Union. They were a part of a centralized organization. So when you have this centralized leadership, you follow what people tell you to do. And they are able to manipulate other people in their region. They're able to manipulate through their enterprise people that know people outside of their region through them. And they're able to do criminal enterprises or cyber-related enterprises in that venue. Eurasian. So now we're talking about the Russians. This is the old Soviet Union. Poland and the Ukraine and Estonia, Latvia, all the countries, Bosnia, Herzegovina, all these countries that are a part of the old Soviet Union began organizing. They call it the hack zone, the Russian hack zone, because there are so many people there that make their money on the backs of victims in the world. And the laws are not written to support that. If you ask the Russian ambassador and said, do you support cybercrime? They would absolutely say no. They have no ties to that. But the reality is, when the malware viruses and some of the viruses are all decoded, they clearly come back to the Russians and places like St. Petersburg and other places in Central or in Europe. One other thing too to note is Russians are not complex writers of code. They're considered very sloppy, and they leave a lot of trails. Where the Chinese are very, very meticulous in their code, and they're very quiet. Russians are much more noisy in cybercrime than the Chinese. The Chinese are a lot more deft at their writing. They don't write spaghetti code, where the Russians tend to write a lot of spaghetti code, throwing things together quickly to make something work, but it also causes a lot of noise because a lot of the programming doesn't work. So there's definitely two different types. Now, in the last couple of years, there has been this kind of view that the Soviets are getting much better at writing their code. So they are learning kind of their lesson from people being caught and people being prosecuted. That you'll actually see that in your coursework, as you have a paper on two Soviet or two Russian coders that were brought in to the United States for trial. The La Cosa Nostra, or the Italian mob. Again, any organization that is operating today is going to have a cyber element. Cartels, La Cosa Nostra, can't think of the African organization off the top of my head. All of these organizations are going to have an organized criminal cyber offensive that they make money on, because that's where the money's at. They can make a lot of money doing the exact same thing without much exposure, and that's really what these organizations want. So the biggest thing to take away from this block through here is these organizations, they are just like any other company. When they look at their books, they say, well, where are we making money? Where aren't we making money? How can we make more money? How do we make better money? How do we not lose people? And the internet is a great place to go to allow your organization to do criminal activity without as great a risk as breaking into the retirement home and holding 30 people hostage for money. That's going to raise some eyes. But if I break into the retirement home by cyber and I steal everybody's identity, I'm probably not going to, set off any alarms for a while. Eventually someone will probably catch on, but I'm going to have time to use that information and time to make my money. Middle Eastern criminal enterprises, they are rising. We are in constant battle right now with Middle Eastern organizations and nation states. We are constantly fighting Iran. It doesn't make the papers. There's no huge battle, but the battle or between the U.S. and Iran, and also organizations in Iraq, even in Saudi Arabia, are very robust. They're happening all the time. There's a lot of people in the United States that are friendly to those countries, and they provide insider access to people from the outside. There are people that are sent here purposely to do that kind of thing. That's one of the issues that is being faced by the country on the immigration front is, how do you tell who should and who shouldn't come in? And all these arguments go into place. But again, knowing if somebody's going to do something or is an insider, you're not going to know until they actually start doing it, in the country. They also know that, so we have a real bad tendency in the U.S. especially, that if it's from Iraq, if it's from Iran, it's a terrorist. And they're not. They're not all dirt poor, living on a mud floor in a shack. Some of them live in apartments just like we do. They have televisions and apartments and houses just like we do. They have internet just like we do. So when you are talking about terrorist organizations, there are terrorist organizations, don't get me wrong, but some of these people that are doing criminal fraud are just criminals doing fraud. They have no desire to be ISIS or any one of the known network terrorist groups. They are looking to be financially or make financial gain. That's what they're trying to do. The drug cartels. The drug cartels are some of the most sophisticated. I had the opportunity to go through some server farms in Central and South America. The drug cartels are organized. They are extremely efficient. They are business organizations with all the trappings of a business organization, but their product is an illegal product. But they have servers, they have accounts receivable, accounts payable, they track money, all that kind of stuff is done through a very sophisticated business network. So the facilitation of different types of crimes that they can do is just a natural genesis of their business operations. But again, these guys are extremely good. They're extremely well funded, obviously, and they're quiet. You don't hear a lot about those networks and those cyber organizations. They're quiet. They do their business internally. They keep things out of the news. And it's only when somebody gets caught do people realize that they were involved in more than just moving narcotics and drugs and people. So again, the Southern cartels, extremely efficient, extremely good at what they do. They've been doing it longer than anybody else. ISIS, everybody was so appalled by what ISIS was doing. ISIS legitimately took things from the cartel playbook and just replicated it over in the Middle East. The difference is the reporting of what happens in cartels never really made the national news, where things that happened over in Iran or Iraq were immediately reported. And that's kind of one of the differences. Someone who's quiet and someone who is overt wants that attention. So you have this thing called the underground marketplace, and as you know from your readings, there's this belief that there's this deep dark web. It's really not a deep dark web. It's just the DNS-less servers that are out there that allow me access to information that I don't normally get if I'm using a traditional browser. I have to use a Tor browser, or I have to use a tool to get onto or into this world. A lot of people talk about it being this kind of clandestine, super secretive, and if you're on Tor, you're doing something illegal. Well, that's not true. Many people use Tor for privacy and security. It has many merits when it comes to privacy and security. But it also has a dark side, the dark web. It also has a place where people are selling and doing drugs and selling weapons and doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and they have dark marketplaces. This is something that you have in any large organization that's built. The internet has places where you can buy things on the open internet. You can get drugs, you can get weapons on the open internet. You just have to know where to go. and you have to know who to talk to, and you have to have a password to get into some of the sites. On the Tor network, you kind of have the same thing. You have to know where to go. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to know what it is you want. And clicking on a link and saying, "Hey, I want to buy 1,000 AK-47s," it's probably not going to result in you getting 1,000 AK-47s. You're probably talking to an FBI agent who's now going to lure you into buying 1,000 things so they can put you in jail. So law enforcement is very much on the internet, or on the Tor network. Law enforcement sets up honeypots all the time to see if there's anybody out there that is looking for certain types of material. That's where these great leads come in sometimes, is from just the Tor network. People not knowing that law enforcement is sitting out there waiting for them. So again, the Tor network it has a bad side, but it also has a very good side. And I use Tor to send email. I use Tor on some of the browsing that I do, because we go into groups and organizations that I want to do research on, and they're not as open on the web as they are on Tor. It does make them a bad group, but that's where you go if you want to have a technical conversation with someone that may be doing some type of ideological hacking, things such as that. Talked about the Hackers for Freedom. I actually talked to them on Tor. I had a conversation with them about why they did what they did when I was doing research on them. So it's a good place for academics to go. It's a good place for you to go. Don't be afraid of it. Just understand that there's a bad side. Once you leave Times Square and you go down an alley, you're gonna get, you probably will get mugged if you're in New York City. So stay out of the back alleys. Stay in the more open spaces. And Tor is one of those open spaces. The internet is Times Square. You're probably pretty safe in Times Square. Tor is another little plaza to the right, and then off that are some alleys you probably don't want to go into. All right, so this has been a chapter on kind of corporate espionage. We've talked about social media. Again, we've talked about insider fraud, and you're going to hear insider all the way through this, because insiders are your greatest threat. They are the greatest threat to your network. Make sure you read the chapter. There are lots of snippets and a lot of other added stuff that's in there, and then also go on the website and you'll find some of the added materials that I have put up there for you for your viewing enjoyment. So with that, I will say goodbye, and I will see you in the next slide set.